In recent times, it's perhaps felt like we've been in constant change. Change in things we take for granted. Our ability to travel. There's been geopolitical change and war, and changes in our society too. Sometimes we might feel overwhelmed by the sheer pace of change. We might occasionally wonder whether we have the dubious honour that, alone in history, never before has a generation had to deal with so much in so little time. The fact that there have been worse pandemics, worse wars, and more abrupt societal changes might offer little comfort to those who feel wearied by the changes and chances of this fleeting world. But it's been ever thus. One word the Church uses for the outside world is secular. We speak of the secular world. It comes from a Latin word meaning generation or age. And generations and ages come and go. Each one is different. So the secular world is the world that's characterized by the flux of constant change. The Church stands in contrast to this. When we enter a church, there's a timeless quality to it. We would recognize a church from any period of history. In some ways, the Church stands outside of time. Our liturgies have their spiritual power because they too have been celebrated century after century after century. This standing outside of time doesn't mean that the Church never changes. Of course it does. But it's never changed for the sake of change. And in this, the Church lines up with an ancient understanding of the nature of God. For the early Church, God was believed to be completely without change. God transcends time and is equally present to the past, the present, and the future. There are some radical implications to this understanding. It means that God didn't think about whether creating the universe would be a good idea, decide it was, then decide to do it, because that would mean God is in time. It also means that God doesn't sit around waiting for a prayer to reach the in tray, think about granting it or not, and then give a reply, because that would mean God is in time. This understanding encourages us not to think of God as a person like us. God isn't angry one day, then forgiving the next. If God is changeless, then God is always, ever love. God is ever pouring out the divine self for the other. Jesus is the image of this invisible reality because he perfectly shows this outpouring of oneself for others in his suffering and death. Christ is where we see what the timeless God is like within the realm of human change. We can become more like this eternal supremacy of love by imitating Christ ever more closely. We too can seek to become unchanging in our compassion, our gentleness, our mercy, our faithfulness. This spiritual path is no easy thing. Anything worthwhile seldom is. Thankfully, in the long history of the Church, we have ample examples to inspire us, and one is Thomas Ken. Thomas was born in Berkhamsted, England, in 1637, and educated at New College, Oxford, a somewhat ironic name, given that at that time it had existed for close to 300 years. He was ordained a priest in 1662, served as chaplain to Charles II, and later consecrated Bishop of Bath and Wells. King Charles' successor was James II. James was a Roman Catholic. He introduced laws to lessen religious unity in the country. Things like allowing people to worship in their homes or chapels as they saw fit, that kind of thing. Thomas opposed this for a variety of reasons. He and others like him were imprisoned in the Tower of London as a result. King James soon fled the country, and his Protestant daughter Mary was offered the throne along with her Dutch husband William of Orange. One of Thomas Ken's famous works is the practice of divine love. We can say that Thomas practiced the eternal love of God by remaining unchangeably faithful. He was faithful to the church, but he also remained faithful to James, the king who had dealt with him so harshly. Thomas still considered James his king. He had sworn an oath to him, and so would not recognize the new monarchy, despite it being better for him personally. He imitated God's faithfulness to us, no matter what we do. Thomas was deposed of being a bishop. There was a schism in the church. But Thomas didn't seek to make trouble. He renounced his rights and spent the final 20 years of his life in the country writing hymns. He sought to remain faithful to that divine love that knows no change. From one of his earlier writings: O my God, though I cannot obey thee as much as I desire, I will do it as much as I am able. I will to my utmost power keep thy commandments with my whole heart and to the end. O accept my imperfect duty, and supply all the defects of it by the merits and love and obedience of Jesus, thy beloved. Amen.